It seems we can't turn on the TV these days without hearing about the harsh economic times we live in: recession, depression, and quantitative easing. A lack of jobs in the labour market, and chronic uncertainty in the Eurozone. And of course, how most of our purses are much lighter than they once were. The future may feel uncertain, but when we look back, we see a past filled with encouraging stories. In the Upper Paleolithic of Europe, the economy, as was, revolved around hunting. The mainstay of this economy was hunting the migratory animals, deer and caribou. Usually these animals exist in great numbers, however their populations are known to crash suddenly. How did people survive, I hear you cry? Well, according to some, parietal or cave art. Many of the images found in Upper Paleolithic cave art depict animals in extreme detail, from various angles and often in profile, with their tracks nearby. It has been suggested that some of these images served as intergenerational references for animals which weren't usually hunted by human groups. And so, if the deer economy crashed, knowledge of hunting other animals was there to fall back on. Sometimes it's not scarcity but abundance which is the threat. In Neolithic Europe, this is thought to be the case. The linear band ceramic culture, named after their distinctive pots, were some of the first farmers in Europe. They lived in long houses made of wood, which huddled in groups, like early villages. For these farmers, working together in a communal setting, what could possibly go wrong? Well, population growth is the problem. Demographic studies of these early farming communities in Europe showed that population numbers fluctuated up and down, sometimes quite rapidly. There wasn't a steady growth, as might have been suspected. Why did this occur? Of course, there are the standard pressures on population, such as disease, old age, and climate. But here something else was happening. It seemed that people were having children based upon a perceived carrying capacity of the land, estimating what they could get out of their farm. Overconfidence or a bad harvest would quickly lead to people starving and even dying, a boom and bust economy of population growth. The Bronze Age of Britain saw several cultural shifts, not least the introduction of bronze technology. The smelting and casting of bronze objects was hypnotic and exotic, and led to a vogue in bronze tools, specifically bronze axe heads. And thus they became very popular. The more popular they became, the more the ingredients were needed, in particular copper. Jutting dramatically into the sea is the Great Orme on the North Wales coast. This monstrous rock was mined to within an inch of its life by Bronze Age people seeking copper ore. When open-cast mining was depleted, they simply mined within the Orme, creating vast, impressive vaults within the rock. Such was the lust for copper, and thus bronze, because it gave one a place in society, in a network of exchange. However, this economy was not to last. The rise of Greek traders and colonies brought new ways to trade and impress others to British shores. In other words, the bronze bubble was well and truly burst. In response, we see traders trying to drive up some demand by hiding vast quantities of bronze axe heads, one of the most famous hoards being the Langton Matravers hoard. For these traders, not even scarcity could bring back the bubble. The Bronze Age was over. The Roman Empire, famous for many things, one of those things being its coinage, with famous coins such as the denarii and the sestertii. However, with coins comes the potential for economic trouble. At the turn of the 2nd century AD, Trajan was emperor, and his empire was running out of money. He had heard, however, of the famous gold and wealth of their neighbours, Dacia, north of the empire. This gold, this wealth, would become their doom. Between AD 101 and 106, the Dacian Wars raged, and the empire was expanded northwards. With this newfound wealth, quite literally a mountain of gold, Trajan commemorated his conquest in marble, in the form of Trajan's column. But the economic woes of Rome were not over. The following centuries saw the economy wax and wane, and across the empire there is evidence of people storing coins for a rainy day. But eventually, an overinflated and devalued currency is partly to blame for the fall of the Roman Empire, They simply couldn't afford to pay their troops anymore, and they suffered for it. At the beginning of the 13th century AD, a fourth crusade was conceived. It was to be simple: attack Egypt and then invade Jerusalem from Cairo. A vast army gathered in Venice, where its leader, Enrico Dandolo, agreed that the Venetian navy would transport them to Egypt. For the better part of a year, the Venetian economy was suspended to build the fleet, but the Crusaders couldn't meet the expense. So Dandolo suggested an alternative form of payment. The crusade would help recapture the Christian city of Zara on the Dalmatian coast. However, the Crusaders were distracted by an offer from exiled Byzantine Emperor Isaac II, for whom they recaptured Constantinople in return for money, but when they arrived, the treasury had been ransacked. In response, the Crusaders went berserk. They owed the Venetians money, and they were going to get it. They burned parts of the city, stole, raped, and pillaged their way through Constantinople, and eventually took over. And in this way, the Byzantine Empire, the last vestige of the Eastern Roman Empire, was divided into kingdoms and never recovered, all to avoid economic collapse. In the 16th century, Philip II was on the throne in Spain. This was a so-called Golden Age, but Spain was heavily in debt, not least through the cost of war with England. Spain needed gold, lots of gold, now, yesterday, fast. They responded by going to South America and forcing natives to mine incalculable sums of gold. Gold, gold. The gold was shipped back to Europe via Spain, but this gold wasn't enough. They needed more, and more, and more, and more, until eventually there was almost too much. They introduced so much gold to the market that its value plummeted, and in 1557 Spain became the first nation in history to go bankrupt. This was catastrophic, though I suspect some were able to crack a smile. This was just the first of many historic economic blunders. The 7 Years' War in the 18th century cost the equivalent of £11 billion. The fall of the Ottoman Empire in the early 20th century cost the equivalent of £9 billion. Between the world wars, the debt saddled upon Germany led to money being almost worthless, a staggering equivalent of £267 billion. Of course, there's the infamous stock market crash, the Great Crash of 1929. And after the Second World War, the rebuilding of countries and breakup of the British Empire is thought to have cost the equivalent of £555 billion. So, yes, we live in difficult times, but economic woes have always dogged humanity. But if nothing else, archaeology shows us the resilience of humanity. And to quote Annie, tomorrow is only a day away.